A legal studies teacher reads the news. Welcome back. I'm going to talk about something that happened today, September 15th, and how you could use it for the legal studies preliminary course for Law in Practice Part 3. So remember, this is part where you can either integrate it into parts 1 and 2 or do it as a separate unit. It's basically looking at a whole bunch of the stuff that you've already talked about and seeing how it actually works in practice. Should be basically almost a third of the course. So this is what's happened. Parliament is launching an inquiry into the appalling state of New South Wales country hospitals. This is by Carrie Fellner. As I said, September 15. The New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry will investigate the state of rural and regional healthcare in New South Wales following allegations that widespread dysfunction in country hospitals is putting lives at risk. Labor secured the numbers for the inquiry on Tuesday and said the expansive probe would scrutinise barriers to services, staffing challenges, capital expenditure, planning systems, and the gulf in health outcomes depending on postcode across New South Wales. Here's the tragic story of Alan Wells. He was discharged against his family wishes from a hospital and later died. There's a couple of very, very sad stories that this article alludes to. Why would this work as an example for this? You'll note, and this is one of the things that people do sometimes in syllabuses. They see these and think they have to pick one of these. But if you read more carefully, it says topics that may be studied include. So students learn about issues that involve an Australian in a domestic jurisdiction or Australian citizens in another jurisdiction, focusing on the mechanisms for achieving justice and responsiveness of the legal system when attempts are made to achieve justice. So topics that may be studied include groups or individuals suffering disadvantage. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, people with mental illness or physical disability, migrants, people socioeconomically challenged, members of other groups. So for this, you are certainly talking about people who are geographically challenged, people in regional and rural areas, and whether they receive the same services that their fellow urban citizens receive. And if they don't, then that's a question of, are we achieving justice? Are these people being looked after from a healthcare point of view? And that is most certainly a question of justice. The inquiry is expected to hear evidence from several patients who've sounded the alarm about standards of care as part of a Sydney Morning Herald investigation into 2 hospitals in the Western New South Wales Local Health District. It's anticipated senior health bureaucrats and New South Wales Health Minister Brad Hazzard will be grilled about the allegations after Mr Hazzard rejected the need for an inquiry early this year. Okay, so here's this question of, well, hang on a second. If he's the minister in charge of health for New South Wales and it's failing, why has he rejected the need for inquiry? And that will certainly be asked of him. The opposition will seek to ask questions such as, were you aware this was happening? What made you make this decision that an inquiry was not needed? The Herald revealed on Saturday that an official investigation concluded a systemic failure to check test results at Dubbo Base Hospital contributed to the death of a baby girl last year. A doctor who subsequently blew the whistle after discovering a further 2,000 unchecked results at the hospital was sacked for being unsupportive of colleagues. And that, if you click on that article, it talks about the fact that that doctor was subsequently kind of took them to unfair dismissals and was found that he was unfairly dismissed. In May, the Herald exposed concerns about overtreatment of Alan Wells, an elderly Cobar man who allegedly went without food or water for 3 days because it was too expensive to roster staff on in a ward that ran out of morphine and paracetamol. Opposition leader, that's horrific, isn't it? Opposition leader Jody Mackay said that a parliamentary inquiry was long overdue and slammed the state of regional healthcare as appalling. So, my phone is just going off here, apologies. And so you've got this question here where we're thinking through and saying, well, if that's the case, then what criteria do we do? What do we have? What are we doing over here in the syllabus? Let's finish the articles, just a little bit to go, and then we'll talk about it. Health outcomes should not be determined by postcodes, she said. This is about equality, fairness, and a fundamental right to healthcare. We need to do it much better for families living in regional New South Wales. Health outcomes should not be determined by postcodes, she said. This is about equality, fairness, and a fundamental right to healthcare. We need to do much better for families living in regional New South Wales. There's been an alarm at statistics showing the median age of death in remote communities is 66, more than a decade lower than the median age in Sydney of 79. Avoidable deaths can be up to twice as likely in rural and regional communities when compared to cities, according to New South Wales Public Health information. So that's not some kind of, someone's trying to skew the statistics. That's the official information there. Labor first called an inquiry in October last year when a death at Tenterfield Hospital was linked to a lack of clinical resources after a man reportedly went into cardiac arrest while there was no doctor on shift or on call. The inquiry is expected to examine the experiences of Indigenous and culturally diverse communities across the state. Health Minister Brad Hazzard has previously rejected calls for it. However, he is overseeing a review of the patient experiences following the Herald's reports. A review of the patient experience. That sounds a lot like a kind of an inquiry that you've already rejected to me. It emerged earlier this month that the review team interviewed a key witness the day before their report to Mr. Hazzard was due and were then denied an extension of time to adequately investigate fresh concerns raised at the meeting. Barwon MP Roy Butler told the Herald the healthcare situation was so dire across his electorate, that spans 44% of New South Wales, so vast areas. You can imagine the issues you'd have with healthcare in such a large region with few people in it, that many hospitals could no longer perform procedures as basic as changing a dressing or stitching up a wound. So here's this issue that you could look at and ask questions, for example, of accessibility, of if the 2,000 unchecked, I mean, that's horrific. If that's the case, where's enforceability? Where are the checks and balances to ensure that hospitals are doing what they're supposed to do? Responsiveness. If this is last October that Labor's calling for an inquiry and it's now September the following year, where's the responsiveness? Protection of individual rights when it comes to healthcare. Just because you live out in the bush does not mean you should have to wait longer to be fed when you're in a hospital. That's horrific. And obviously meeting society's needs. So this is a really good example of you could go into the investigation, a whole bunch of different articles looking at it. So this is from 3 months ago, from walk to Manly to amputation. Hospitals are putting lives at risk. This is also by Carrie. All right. And this is this Grazier talking about being a victim of a dysfunctional health system. So a whole bunch of things to look at that really cover so many criteria that you really want to think through and go, this is a really clear answer to a lot of these criterias, and it'd be helpful to show where it looks like healthcare in regional areas has been struggling and the government has been struggling to actually be responsive enough. Okay, so check it out. Very, very helpful.